America is a better country
without you.
Look, I don't place a lot of stock in polls, maybe unless the data they're reporting shows quite large and comfortable margins. But it's not just the polls saying Ted Cruz could be in trouble this November. The GOP is saying it themselves. And that is comforting, although I will remind people, both in Texas and outside of Texas, that even when things appear certain to go one way, the Texas GOP always seems to have a few cards up its collective sleeve. I'll refer you to the fact that Ken Paxton is still somehow our state's attorney general when he really should no longer be.
If the ballots go out, the genie's out of the bottle and we lose. Game over. Texas legislature very likely turns Democrat.
On the national level, the GOP is hoping to flip the Senate in November, and there's a chance they could actually do that. But Ted Cruz, of all people, might screw that up for them. I guess that's what happens when a sitting senator spends more time podcasting than governing.
I actually spent a good chunk of the day Friday playing basketball because we just had nothing else to do, so I played hoops.
Politico got hold of a memo from the Senate Leadership Fund that showed Ted Cruz polling just 1 point ahead of his Democratic opponent, Colin Allred. So according to GOP polling, he's still in the lead, but last month he was leading by 3 points. So his support is dwindling in the lead up to the election. For context, Texas is still a red-leaning state. Trump is leading Harris by 5 points according to the same polling source, so you can't necessarily lump Ted Cruz in with overall Republican support here. Now it seems as though it's a race to see who can spend more on political ads and appearances, so that should be a lot of fun for me, but Colin Allred has got more money behind him. Actually, I should say that Colin Allred has got more legitimate money behind him. The FEC has accused Ted Cruz of striking a sketchy deal with iHeartRadio that puts money from iHeart into his political campaign to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
But now, with iHeart stepping in to distribute and promote, the reach is going to be that much broader. And I think that's really exciting because this was always about really equipping our listeners. If you're going to battle to save the country, if you're going to take on the cultural Marxist, if you're going to take on the socialist and the people coming at everything that built America, you need the tools, you need the information, you need to know what's going on. And the vision of this podcast was always, we're going to give you as much of those tools as possible so that you're prepared and you know the inside story.
Anyway, per the GOP memo, they are now polling to assess whether intervention is necessary to protect the seat in Nebraska, whatever that even means. And in Texas, they are well aware that they have to guard their flanks because Allred has been heavily outspending Ted Cruz for weeks. Stephen Law, the president and CEO of the Senate Leadership Fund, said, "We are putting everything we have into this fight, so there is no looking back with regret." Someone asked me what it's like living in Texas, as in, what is the word around these streets about Ted Cruz? I gotta say, I don't typically hang out around a whole lot of Ted Cruz voters, but that said, this is Texas. They are around, they're unavoidable to a certain extent. Houston, however, is a blue city. One time, I had stumbled into a Ted Cruz rally. It must have been back in 2018 when he was running against Beto O'Rourke, and I really did stumble into it. I just happened to be in the same part of the city where he was holding his rally that night because I would not have voluntarily surrounded myself with the kind of people who would willingly attend a Ted Cruz rally. But from what I overheard, most of those people weren't even from Houston. They came in from the outskirts of the city. They were from all of the rural surrounding areas like College Station and whatever else is out there. I don't go out to those parts very often, so I can't speak on what goes on out there with any kind of particular insight. But on those occasions when I have hung out with known Republicans, people who have voted for Ted Cruz in the past, I've never heard anyone say anything good about Ted Cruz. Most of the time, they just don't say anything about him at all. But whenever I have heard them address their voting record, they basically say that they just voted for him because he was the Republican on the ballot. That's it. As I said, though, Democrats in Texas know better than to get our hopes up. We have been burned so many times before. Beto's loss in 2018 was tough because it was so unbelievably close. It was like a 3-point difference. Is Colin Allred the guy who can and will finally take down Ted Cruz? Perhaps. He's an ex-football player who seems strong and rich and popular, all traits that your more typical Republican voters seem to value. Allred certainly comes across as more alpha than Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz has got more of a mouth on him, which Republican voters seem to like. And Ted Cruz is a seasoned politician. He knows how this game is played, and he's got a lot of friends in high places with a lot of money who have interest in keeping Ted Cruz right where he is in the Senate.
The Republican members that are here today, what have you all done to help Joe Biden in this year that you all have waited for?
All right, so that's a ridiculous and silly question. I want to commend you for being the media and telling it Democrat policy. So let me ask you something.
Come on, man, that's been going on for 20 years.
Okay, hey, let me ask you something. Let me ask you something. What rate of illegal immigration did we have in 2020? Do you know anything? I asked you a question. Do you know anything?
How long have you been in office?
I've been in office 11 years now.
And this has been kicked the count during multiple administrations.
Except you're okay. You don't get to argue with me. You asked your question. You asked your question. You don't get. You want to hold a press conference? You can do it over there.
You want
to hold a press conference? You can do it over there.
How are you?
So hold on. I'm going to answer his question.
Things are heating up here in Texas, and no, I'm not just talking about the fact that it's still 90 degrees outside in October. No, I'm talking about the Senate race between Ted Cruz and his Democratic challenger, Colin Allred.
Folks are saying around the country what we know to be true here in Texas, which is that I'm going to beat Ted Cruz.
The latest polls are promising. Allred has broken the tie and is finally up by 1 point. Ted, I love to remind people, came dangerously close to losing his seat to the frightfully progressive for Texas, Beto O'Rourke, in 2018. So while a 1 point lead is hardly anything to get excited over usually, it is somewhat significant here in Texas. Of course, it's still within the margin of error, and these polls are less than reliable on the best days. On top of that, Texans are reluctant to hope because our hopes have been dashed so many times before. But why was Ted Cruz so antagonistic toward the guy in the clip we watched?
Except you're okay. You don't get to argue with me. You asked your question. You asked your question.
Ted was asked what he's done to work with the Biden administration, and it was a reasonable question because after serving as the senator from Texas for 11 years now, Ted Cruz is trying to rebrand his image going into November's election. He's trying to tell people who he is now, which is apparently different from who he has been for the last 11 years. And who he is now is bipartisan. And according to Cruz, he's really always been bipartisan.
This border deal was misguided from the beginning. Why is that? Because this deal was drafted by the Democrats. It was negotiated with the Democrats.
In an interview with Politico, Cruz, who's known for being super partisan actually, said that his reputation for being one of the most hardline members of the Senate just isn't right. He said, "What is new is not that I'm passing bipartisan legislation that helps produce jobs in Texas. I've been doing that since the day I arrived in the Senate. What is new is we're finally getting the press to report on it." The man has a right-wing podcast that he spends more time hosting than he does governing, not to mention the fact that he was a key part of the January 6th attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. And speaking of which, when he was asked by Caitlin Collins on CNN if he would accept the 2024 election results, he called the question ridiculous, which seems to be his go-to when he gets asked questions he doesn't like, and then he proceeded to not really answer the so-called ridiculous question.
You were the first senator to object to the votes. Mm-hmm. In 2024, will you certify the election results? Do you plan to object, or will you accept the results regardless of who wins the election?
So, Caitlin, I got to say, I think that's actually a ridiculous question.
It's a yes or no question, though.
No, it's not. Let me explain why it's a ridiculous question. It's not a question. You've ever asked a Democrat that?
Of course.
What Democrat?
But what Democrats?
Hold on a second. What Democrats challenge it?
What Democrats? I know. I've been down this road many times.
But
no Democrat. You cannot compare the two situations. We have talked about that. We've seen the audio of that when they protested on the Senate floor.
Hold on a second.
But has you ever had a sitting president who refused to facilitate the peaceful transition of power, refused to acknowledge that his successor won the presidency?
So, we did have a peaceful transfer of power. I was there on January 20th. I was there on the swearing in.
Barely.
Following the January 6th insurrection, Cruz called the riot a terrorist attack only to later recant after Tucker Carlson pressed him on it. He said that it would be ridiculous for him to call people protesting a terrorist attack. He was talking specifically about the really dangerous people who committed violence against cops. Those were the terrorists. Suddenly, it's not so cool to be a far-right, sucking up to Trump who called your wife ugly MAGA Republican podcaster. Not only that, but it's not cool to be a Republican in a state where the maternal death rate has increased by 56% after a Republican-led abortion ban went into effect in 2019. And the people of Texas know who to blame for this. While the Republicans call us childless cat ladies with no stake in our futures, women in Texas and other similar states across the country are afraid to get pregnant because of Republican policies. Check out this ad that's currently running here in Texas.
It's gotten more dangerous to be a woman in Texas.
And it's Ted Cruz's fault. He fought for an abortion ban that goes too far.
They didn't just make it illegal to have an abortion, they made it illegal for me to do my job.
So whether you were raped or something went tragically wrong and your life is at risk,
women are now forced to flee Texas for care. I'm not a political person.
But seeing what I've seen,
I can never vote for Ted Cruz.
I can never vote for Ted Cruz.
I was watching Bob's Burgers the other night, which is like my feel-good show when I don't want to think about the world or anyone in it, and it was interrupted with Ted Cruz, of all people. Gotta love election season. Also, did Hulu change something? Like, why am I getting ads there now? Anyway, Ted is now trying to toe the line that he has so often scorned. He's voted to not shut down the government, which is nice of him. He insists that his vote against IVF and birth control access wasn't because he doesn't actually support those things. It was because it was a backdoor Democrat-led effort to skirt abortion laws in red states, so he says. Also, he's voted for tax relief for hurricane victims. How interesting.